Welcome to the Dr. Dance Mom Podcast, your guide to strong dancers with a bright future. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Christensen, doctor of physical therapy, dance medicine specialist, and proud dance mom. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. On the last episode, we talked a little bit about culture and how negative culture looks or manifests in competitive dance. Today, I want to chat about what we can do about it and where you can go if you find yourself in that type of environment. One of the things I loved about the Unbound documentary is the quiet defiance, but also the resilience and community that the dancers so brilliantly embodied. It's very easy to talk about culture because it's a very polarizing topic, but I want to again reiterate that these environments, I believe and hope, are a shrinking minority in dance. They exist, but as people are having these conversations and being more bold and brave to speak about these topics, people are setting healthier boundaries, and hopefully the incidence of these things will continue to decline. These culture things are not unique to dance. They can also be seen in other elite sports, such as competitive cheer, gymnastics, equestrian sports, and high-level travel sports or sports where children train seriously from a very young age. If you saw yourself or your child or your situation in the last episode, be assured that it's not you. It's a culture problem, not a personal failure. I want to reiterate that the studio that was right for your 2-year-old tiny ballerinas class may no longer be the right fit for your dancer. We don't typically do the level of research about a studio at that age that we would do if we were looking for a competitive studio for our 10-year-old. And honestly, most of the time, we don't really know to do that. Your dancer may be in an elite studio, but doesn't want to compete at a high level or go to multiple conventions each season. Maybe they like musical theater more or want to join a less competitive team. That's okay, and it's okay to switch. Full disclosure, I have not had to switch dance studios for my daughter, but I did have a culmination of similar issues to what we are discussing here that resulted in my older daughter switching schools for her 8th grade year after being with the same small group of kids since preschool. It's a completely different situation, but arguably more stressful in terms of decision making. There were a lot of factors that we had to consider in terms of logistics, and we had chosen that school for her for a very specific reason, and we're kind of contemplating whether or not that environment, that culture was still right for her. I understand the time that it takes to evaluate the weight of the decision making and the fear of change for your child, which can be huge. It turns out in my daughter's case, it was the best decision we could have made for her, and I probably should have made it sooner. She's thriving now and absolutely loves her new school. She's made new friends very quickly. And honestly, it's so nice to see her happy and doing really well. The majority of people I've spoken to that have changed studios have felt the same way. It's scary, but the outcome has usually been amazing for their dancer. I also want dancers to know that your experiences in these environments are not a reflection of your worth as a dancer. There are so many dancers out there with similar stories, which is why we wanted to open the conversation in a broader space. Instead of feeling inadequate, maybe start asking, what's wrong with the environment? Is this the right place for me? So what can you do? You can find or build safer spaces. Yes, this may mean leaving the current studio environment, but it can also mean taking the initiative to build a safer, more inclusive environment where you are. Maybe you're not a dancer who is targeted by toxic behavior, but you're recognizing it around you. Be a leader. Don't contribute to the jokes. Reassure or befriend those who are being targeted genuinely. And shoot down the negative talk around you. If you don't give any validation to the individuals who are participating, they're more likely to stop the behavior altogether. Modeling different leadership, inclusivity, and a community that celebrates all dancers regardless of where they are in their dance journey helps to support everyone. You can also move studios, of course. If this is your goal, the timing is a consideration. If it's early in the season, you may want to go elsewhere quickly and cut your losses, depending on how much the environment is affecting your dancer. If it's later in the season, it may be best to quietly do some research and leave at the end of the season. If your dancer is burned out from a really tough season and still wants to dance, but doesn't want to be in groups or join a big studio right away, there are other options for continued training without falling behind. Look into a studio that focuses solely on community performances and doesn't compete at all. This can be a nice option and maybe a little bit of a break for your dancer. They may even find that they enjoy this type of environment and want to stay. Another option is taking online classes. This can be done as the dancer's only training or as a hybrid model. For example, they could take some in-person ballet and technique classes to keep their technique in a local studio and supplement it with additional online classes. There are lots of options. Some online studios will also do choreography remotely for solos. If your dancer still wants to compete for the year as you're reevaluating, this can be a great option. Typically, the choreography is done over an online platform like Zoom, and the choreographer studio owner will register them at local competitions. On my next episode, we'll talk to Haley Fitch, who has been successfully operating in this model as a studio owner and choreographer. When seeking out potential new programs to try, seek out programs or companies with clearly stated values of safety or inclusion. This can be a great place to start if you're looking for a new dance home. So what should you look for when scouting studios? What are some of the signs or green flags that you're in a healthy environment? The first is respectful corrections. Teachers correct technique without shaming bodies, personalities, or intelligence. They may use phrases that sound like, let's try this, here's how we can improve, and not what's wrong with you. Injury and pain are also taken seriously. Dancers are encouraged to speak up about pain and are not penalized for taking care of an injury. The standard in the studio should be, let's modify, let's check in, or how are you feeling today? Not push through pain or you'll lose your spot. There should be space to talk about injuries, mental health, and other topics that are often associated with shame. There should be clear boundaries and professionalism within the studio. There should be rules around physical contact, privacy, and social media that are clear. No one student should be exempt from the rules, and no one student should be chronically targeted. Directors and teachers are approachable and welcome questions and feedback, and don't make you feel stupid for asking. Dancers should also not be punished for asking respectful questions and not understanding something on the first try. Dancers should be encouraged and supported no matter how a performance goes on stage. So really just looking for those signs that the teachers are inclusive and supportive of all students, regardless of their place in their dance journey, mistakes that are made, and they support them in their growth pattern. You want to look for a studio where diverse bodies and identities are welcomed. And you can see this by just looking at the makeup of their dance company. Costumes, casting, and corrections shouldn't shame a dancer's shape, skin color, identity, or background. You'll see a range of body types and personalities being celebrated and not just one ideal. Joy should also be visible at the studio. Yes, dancers can be tired and working hard, but you also see laughter, moments of celebration, and genuine teacher-student warmth in relationships. Seeing the teachers and the students interact is an important way to be able to evaluate what that dynamic looks like. They should also allow for participation in outside activities, of course, with some discretion. So being on a dance company or a dance team is a huge commitment, and if a student is going to make that commitment to that team, then that should be prioritized. But if there is time and it's able to be worked out, it is nice for the students to also be able to participate in school activities. So it's an important part of their growth outside of the dance studio. Things like allowing for participation in the school play, band or chorus, concerts, other sports. And sometimes you can tell based on the class structure. For example, where my daughter dances, usually by the time they get to middle school, they have a later class schedule. So they start a bit later, which allows them to be able to participate in after school activities or other sports, which is really nice because other sports are really important for cross-training purposes. And it is nice for the students to have the ability to explore other things. Also allowing for excused absences for school events occasionally, like school dances or, again, concerts, things like that is important as well. There should be space for team building, events where the team is included across all levels. So maybe annual events where the entire company is included in some sort of outing, or parents leading gatherings and including everyone on one level. So maybe one level or group gets together periodically to do some sort of team building activity is nice. Banquets or celebrations where all team members are celebrated and not just select team members. So this brings me to ways that parents can help create and protect a positive culture within the studio, because parents are a huge piece of the studio culture. The first is to model healthy values at home. Focus on effort, growth, and character, not just titles and placements. So saying things like, I love how you handled that correction, or I really loved your performance, not just your technique, but your outward performance in that piece today. Not only, did you win or how did you place? Celebrate small wins. You looked more confident today. Your turns were more controlled. So that sort of feedback, again, instead of focusing on the placement. Parents can also be kind of a culture checker in the lobby. So again, just as I mentioned with the dancers, kind of avoiding those situations where it feels like someone's being targeted, maybe kind of shutting down some of that talk. And then, participating in creating that positive culture by maybe organizing events for the entire team and things like that. In terms of communication with the studio, I think that can help a lot with the culture as well. So when something feels off, if you do have a question about something, including like casting or something along those lines, don't be afraid to communicate with the studio. Approach the studio with some sort of curiosity in terms of like, can you help me understand how this decision was made or how you handle this specific thing, versus, accusations of this was unfair or something along those lines. There may be a very good reason why something was cast a certain way that, takes into consideration things that you may not have considered yourself. You also want to be able to ask about things like injury policies, cross-training, how they address bullying, how casting decisions are communicated. So just having a good understanding for all of those things helps to avoid misunderstandings or miscommunications that can sometimes lead to frustration on the parents' part, and then maybe degrading of that communication and that culture a little bit. Parents can also advocate for education and policies. So I think this is a really good place where parents can advocate for things for their children. So suggest or support things like wellness workshops, ask for written policies about things like harassment or bullying, and how to report a concern. So if there's something that you're noticing, maybe there isn't a clear policy, or I don't feel like I fully understand how this is handled in the studio, maybe suggest that there is something written somewhere that parents can access so that there can be some kind of clear guidelines to follow there. Also offering help to the studio. So if you have an idea for something, I mentioned workshops. So for example, as a dance parent within my studio, I have offered to host workshops and do things like injury screenings, because again, like my goal is to help the studio. And so I'm not necessarily looking to put more work on their plate. They are so overwhelmed as studio owners as it is. So if you do have an idea for something, then maybe offer to take charge of that idea or to help organize it. And that's a great way to be involved in fostering that culture in the studio. Now, how dancers can contribute to a healthy studio culture. And I think, for most of these dancers, it's important for the parents to also guide them at a certain age. I think once we're into high school, most of these dancers should understand their role in this, but the younger dancers may need a little bit more assistance from parents in terms of guiding how to navigate some of these things. But, being the teammate that you wish you had. So being able to celebrate others' wins, complimenting them. So Maybe you're at a competition and someone like really nailed their solo. Tell them. Tell them that they did a great job. Tell them that your solo looked amazing. So just that little bit of support to your mutual teammate goes a long way to provide a lot of positive reinforcement to that culture. And I think kids can really learn a lot from that, from supporting their teammates, even if it's someone who's competing directly against them. Checking on teammates who seem down or injured. So if there's someone who maybe had a not so great performance, maybe they froze on stage or forgot their choreography, or maybe they did hurt themselves and they can't dance, or they can't dance for the weekend. Checking in on them, including them in things that everybody's doing and trying to help lift them up, asking them if they're okay, if they want to talk, maybe trying to do small, nice gestures for them to help lift them up. And then refusing to participate, I kind of alluded this to a couple of times already, but if, someone makes a joke about someone that's actually not funny, don't laugh at it. And then, changing the subject or walking away if, conversations start to take a turn into a place where you feel uncomfortable, like it's not a positive conversation. And then speaking up in small ways. So if something feels uncomfortable in class, maybe asking, making sure, clarifying, can you show that correction again, instead of internalizing that and feeling inadequate. If you see a peer being targeted, maybe go and show them some support and say, hey, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. How are you feeling about that? Or if it's something that's a little bit more dangerous, or you feel like somebody's a little bit more at risk, then let an adult know what happened. For your dancer, I think it's also important to help them protect their own relationship with dance, because burnout is real and it does happen, I would say, somewhat frequently around the middle school age. I feel like that's when I see at least a lot of dancers moving on to other things, either because they're burned out from, it could be studio culture. It could also just be overwhelmed with the training schedule. So just remind them that it's okay to take breaks. If they really feel called to do something else or another sport, allow them that time to explore it. Maybe allow them to explore different styles of dance if that's something that they're interested in. Maybe different teachers or even a different studio if they're feeling uncomfortable where they are. Let them take a summer intensive at a different studio to try out a different environment, and maybe they would like that. You're also allowed to outgrow a space that no longer feels right. So if something doesn't feel right, it's okay to acknowledge that and say, hey, maybe it's time that we move on. In terms of studios and teachers and how they can actively build positivity, I think setting expectations out loud is really important, and setting that example. So if you overhear dancers correcting one another in a way that is not kind, just correcting them and saying, that's not appropriate. Make sure you're using kindness as you're addressing your fellow teammates, noting that we don't comment on bodies, that alignment and health and technique are most important. Also normalizing conversations about safety. So asking the class, maybe, how's everyone feeling this week? I think this could be most important the weekend after a competition or convention. So really just checking in with those dancers to see how they're feeling. Those weekends are very, very long, and some kids, depending on their tolerance to stress and anxiety, may handle that better than others. Anxiety itself takes a huge toll on anyone's body physically. And so the sheer physical exhaustion from just being on for that length of time and from physically dancing is one thing, but the mental load that it takes on that dancer, especially if they are someone who gets a little bit more performance anxiety, on Monday after that weekend, like, they may be feeling really run down and they may need a break. So being able to acknowledge that, kind of checking in with the dancers, and maybe doing something a little bit lighter on like the Monday after a convention or competition weekend is, I think, a really great way to have respect over that. Giving them clear reminders on how to report concerns and making sure that they understand that they can report concerns. I see a lot where dancers are afraid to approach their teachers or directors, and I don't necessarily think it's always because of some sort of negative culture environment. A lot of times it's just sheer intimidation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the teacher has done anything wrong, but I think the way that respect sometimes can be interpreted, especially for younger ones, I think that they feel like that also means like it's disrespectful to even approach with a concern. And maybe they just don't know quite how to do that or how to phrase it. So again, maybe that's where parents can come in and kind of guide those dancers in that way. But at the same time, I think as a teacher or studio owner, it can be really valuable to make sure and reiterate often to the dancers that if they do have concerns, if something is wrong, that they're there for them and that they are there to support them and that they can be approached with some of those concerns or questions. Another way studios can really build this positive culture is to develop buddy systems for dancers. So in the beginning of a season, maybe pairing like a younger dancer with an older dancer who can help kind of be a little bit of a mentor for the season. That's a really great way to do that. Having things like team circles where dancers can share one positive thing about themselves or someone else is even better. So just thinking of something positive to share about a teammate. There's a lot of other ways that these environments can really be built up, but these are just some examples of things that I think can be approached if anyone finds themselves in this sort of environment that seems to be not as positive. So either looking to help be a leader to build that environment back up, or to just look for an environment that may embody some of these things that may be signs of, this is a safer space, or, maybe the culture here is a little bit more positive or something that just supports your own goals. And I think that that's important too. So having a good idea, and I think we alluded to this in the last episode, knowing what your own values are and your own goals, and kind of thinking about how does this place, how does this studio environment support those things. Everyone's goals and values are going to be different. And so it's not to say like Studio A is better than Studio B. It just may be that Studio A and Studio B's focus are a little bit different. The way that they structure their training environment, how they put together their competitive teams or company. One may have auditions, one may not have auditions. There's a lot of different values that are created by studio owners, and it's all based on their vision for their studio or their dance company. So I think having a good understanding of what that is and what that looks like going into it is probably one of the more important things when trying to choose an environment for your dancer, or if you're looking for a new one. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is to really look at all of those things. And I think just remembering that healthy dance environments don't happen by accident. They're built on daily choices by studio owners, teachers, parents, and dancers. You may not be able to control everything, but you do have power to model things like kindness, power to ask better questions, and power to move towards spaces that treat dancers like whole humans and not just a performance. And so that's what I hope the takeaway is from these conversations on culture, because my goal here was not to, sit here and harp on the cultural environment. I know there's a lot of information out there right now on dance culture, but I think just acknowledging, again, these spaces, what they can look like, what parents should look for one way or another when they're looking for a good environment for their dancer, can be really helpful to those who aren't familiar with dance and are maybe looking for some guidance. So I hope that these last 2 episodes will help to achieve that. My last note here is, in preparing for this episode, I was really kind of thinking of things to include regarding building these healthier environments. as I've mentioned in earlier episodes, I am a huge Taylor Swift fan. So I am a big Swiftie. I have been ever since she started creating music. And the Eras Tour documentary, episodes 1 and 2, The End of an Era, just came out on Friday on Disney Plus. And if you haven't watched those episodes yet, it doesn't matter if you're a Taylor Swift fan or if you're not a Taylor Swift fan. There is so much that can be learned from watching that documentary. The way that she treats everybody around her is so visible in just the small gestures that are evident in the documentary. I thought specifically of episode 2, and one of the things that I've always respected about her is her ability to give somebody else the spotlight. The fact that she is probably one of the biggest pop stars in the world right now and has a whole lot of attention on her. There's a lot of people that I think would take that attention and really want to kind of hold it for themselves. It's very intentional in the documentary, and you can tell just the way that she's giving the spotlight to the dancers that backed her up on stage, her band members. I mean, they're the ones narrating most of the documentary. It's pretty incredible to see. There's some deeper dives into the background of a couple of her dancers. I don't want to give too much away. And I just really feel like that is what we should be striving for our children in these environments. That community, which you can see in the documentary, is so strong. The way that everybody supports one another, you can see the genuine love and care each of them have for each other. Even if you go on social media and you see them interact with each other, it's pretty remarkable how she has a way of bringing people together. And that is a strong leader that knows how to build positive culture. And so I know it sounds cliche at this point because everybody's always talking about her. But again, she's someone that I've always respected. And this is exactly why I've always respected her, and I've always brought her up in conversations, because she just has this way of really lifting people up. So anyway, if you're interested, it doesn't matter if you like her music or don't like her music. The documentary is less about the music and more about the making of the Eras Tour. And again, honestly, I think a lot of it is more of a spotlight on that community, her dancers especially. She tells their stories in the best way. There's a moment in the episode 2 where she is working through choreography for the Tortured Poets department, and Mandy Moore had this vision for the dancers to be on the platform, and it's kind of like rising and going down. And Taylor was like, okay, there's only one problem with that. We're all the way up here. So they were going to be kind of in front of them in the stage. She's like, nobody's going to be looking there. And just the fact that her mind went there, she was like, okay, that's great. But she wanted to share the spotlight. She didn't want everybody to be just staring at her. She wanted those dancers to also be showcased. And I think that's it right there. Like that one small gesture, but that was so natural for her. If everyone can create those types of environments where they're not just thinking about, this is my spotlight, this is our spotlight. And I think that's really the biggest takeaway. So let me know what you think. Leave me comments, DM me after you've watched the Eras Tour documentary. If you haven't already, I just think that that's pretty remarkable. I absolutely loved seeing how she showcased all of her dancers. And that about wraps it up for this episode of the Dr. Dance Mom podcast. I appreciate everyone who's listened this far. And if you have questions, if you have episode suggestions, please check the description below, find my email address, and send me an email, comment on Instagram, TikTok, and let me know your thoughts. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something. Please be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Also, make sure you head over to Instagram and YouTube and follow us there. Send us your listener questions, topic suggestions, and feedback at doctordancemompodcast@gmail.com. That's Doctor, fully written out, Dance Mom Podcast, also fully written out, @gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.